been lovely hearing from his family. I heard from Tibor, so many times about his children. Talked about you all the time. And to hear back about him from you is overpowering. I've known Tibor for all of my adult life, not all of my life, but since I was a teenager. And it's not a speech I'd want to give because I never really thought of Tibor as not being with us. He's just always been Tibor, and there. Now these remarks were harder for me to formulate than I expected. I read a number of obituaries from other people. They're all beautiful and loving. They told me some things I didn't know. They brought back some very fond memories. It'd be hard to add much, but I'll try anyway. As a prologue, I'll mention sharing something before I say a lot of nice things. Tibor was the most difficult person I have ever known in my life. He was exasperating. He really drove me crazy on many occasions. We had heated arguments on the phone that ended up with the phone being slammed down. I remember one time he slammed down the phone, and then he called me up to slam it down again. I edited one of his books and was in the midst of trying to carve out an essay out of various things he had sent to me for another book I'm editing when I heard the news. I dreaded the editing of that essay. I knew it would mean an argument and that I would feel bad about it because I would be critical. But I also knew he would eventually agree to the result and that he would appreciate it and be happy to see it in print. I also dealt with him traveling in seminars in Europe, and that I can tell you was not an easy experience. One time in Sweden, in Ballerud, he gave a lecture, and I'd heard it already several times, and Tibor's approach to foreign audiences was to speak louder, very loud. So he was booming this lecture, and I heard the lecture, and I said, I just can't sit here anymore. So I went to another part of the hotel, and I could still hear it. I said, okay, I went up to my room in the hotel, and the three floors up, and his voice was coming out of the sink. Went through the pipes. So I finally, this is true, I went out and got a rowboat and rowed out into the Baltic so that I wouldn't have to hear Tibor lecturing. But how could one not love him? He was Tibor. I had heard him speak in the early 1970s, I don't really remember where, and my first interaction with him that I recall was in 1973. I invited him to speak at a libertarian student retreat at a very snowy resort in the California mountains. And our relationship did not get off to a good start. I had made a mistake, which I never made again after that, of not reading his bio very carefully. I introduced him and said he had taught at Claremont. Before I was finished with the sentence, Tibor boomed at me. Said, I never taught at Claremont. And I just finished by saying, Professor McCahon has done many things, but he has never taught at Claremont. A few years after that, I wrote something, I don't recall where, that was less than nice about Tibor. And accused him of deviating from some correct libertarian position, as announced by a very aggressive, combative, and frequently mean-spirited economist known to some of us here, and to whom I was at the time overly devoted. I'm pleased that after I reached some maturity in my early 20s, I saw Tibor at a conference, and I went up to him and told him I had come to apologize to him. Tibor said I had nothing to apologize for, but he accepted my apology nonetheless. He was wrong about whether I had something to apologize. I certainly did, but we became friends after that, although it did entail some intense doses of exasperation over the years. Tibor was a very thoughtful man, and he had many insights. I do wish he'd had a bigger impact as an academic philosopher, but he was also so impatient. He was so eager to get his ideas into print so people could benefit from them and talk about them and argue with them. He sometimes didn't read what he had written before he sent it off. I edited his book, Generosity, Virtue, and Civil Society, which I consider, unsurprisingly, one of his very best works. It's full of wonderful, interesting ideas, but editing it was a truly memorable experience. I challenged a lot of his statements. I demanded documentation of claims. I had to rebuild sentences and do all the things editors normally do, just more. I once shared that experience with Dr. Jude Doherty, who was editor of the Review of Metaphysics, in which one of Tibor's very best essays had appeared. I think it was really a very fine piece of philosophical work. And I discussed this experience, and Dr. Doherty congratulated me. He said on, quote, surviving a Tibor Machan editing experience. I remember Tibor's impatience about checking sources and claims and his sometimes cavalier attitude towards crafting sentences with care. So when I asked him for an essay for another book, I very carefully composed my email and read it many times. So I would ask him if he had something already published on the topic that he could send to me, in the hope he would send me something someone else had already read, and perhaps had some impact on it. About an hour and a half later, I got an essay in the email, a new one he had just written just for me. But it wasn't what I wanted. So I said, well, this is not exactly what I'm looking for. And that evening he sent me another one that he wrote just right then for that. It was frustrating, but I gathered all the writings I could find by him, and I said, he had so many interesting ideas, I'll pull them together and extract them and send him back an essay that I think will be a distillation of his insights. And I was actually working on that when I learned he passed away. And it made the pain so much worse that I was disappointed in myself that I had delayed for so long for something that Tibor really wanted, that was important to him. He would be so pleased for his ideas to be out there and for other people to argue with him. He delighted in thought. He introduced others to ideas. He loved discussions. To hear this from his children, that was Tibor for sure, with everyone all the time. He may have been too impatient to formulate his ideas with the precision and boredom required for academic writing, but he was very effective as a speaker and a teacher. He introduced people to ideas with gusto in personal discussions, lectures, interviews, and on those occasions, he spoke in common sense, plain English, albeit filtered through Hungarian grammar. I recall watching once Tibor counting something up on a list, and he was saying, tizenegy, tizenkettő, tizenhárom. He still counted in Hungarian. And I love to hear him speak Hungarian. I love the language. I have very fond memories of him in Hungary, where our Hungarian friends quickly identified him as a well-known Hungarian personality type. They said, every village has a Tibor. Tibor's personal generosity of spirit enabled him to do something else that I find more difficult. He was remarkably tolerant of professors with utterly mad ideas. I don't mean just politically and legally tolerant as one ought to be, but he took the time to interact with crazy people, to co-publish with them, to contest their views, to contrast them with his. His gracious personality was one of his very best features. If Tibor has turned out to be wrong about the afterlife, I hope he sits sipping a celestial beer and enjoying and soaking in all the nice things that we're saying about him today. He was a treasure. I benefited more than I can say from his kindness and his remarkable empathy and his generosity of spirit when I had difficult times in my life, and Tibor reached out to me and said, Tom, he said, you deserve to be happy. You're not such a bad guy, after all. It more than balances all of the exasperation and the hair pulling and desperate editing of his prose and dealing with traveling with him. Tibor never held a grudge. This is something that was a really remarkable feature. He never held a grudge. He always forgave. He was kind and gentle. As far as I know, he never wished anyone else ill. He lived his life with relish for the next chance to write or teach, for the next tasty meal, for the next meeting with friends, for the next trashy novel, and for the next big adventure. Tibor, we love you. We miss you. All those whose lives intersected with yours are better people because of it.